Constructors in Java. Constructors used to initialize the instance variables of that object while we're creating the object. So for example, we have a student class, and the student class will have a multiple instance variables like a string, name, integer, student ID, right? So we have two instance variables, and now from other class, I will create an object of student class saying main method. And I will say, hey student, student equals to new student. So I have created the object of the student class. Now I will initialize the instance variables of the student class, saying, hey, the student dot name equals to John. Then we'll say student dot student ID equals to 101. If you don't initialize them, they will have a default values, like a name will be null, student ID will be 0, because integers default value will be 0. For the string values, it will be null. But when we initialize them, they will have the values. This is how we initialize the attributes of this object. But now, I want to initialize these attributes while I'm creating an object, right? When I say new student, I want to say, hey, the student name is John, and the ID of the student 101. How I will be able to do that without initializing them separately in different lines? For that, I will need to create a constructor here saying public student, and that will take two parameters saying student name, integer, student ID. I will initialize the instance variables of this class, right? So I will say, hey, initialize this name with equals to this name, right? But when I say a name equals to name, what's going to happen? This name variable that we say here will be pointing to this. And this name variable will be pointing to this variable again. So what it does, it simply initializes itself. But we want to initialize this variable, right? We want to say, hey, this name, which is, we gotta put it here, this name equals to this name, right? So for that, we will use a keyword this. This dot name equals to name. This name will be this name, and this name will be this name. So when we use this keyword, it will be pointing to the variable of that instance, of that object's variable, right? Which is this variable, not a local variable here. So, and the same, we will say this dot student ID, which is the student ID, this instance variable will be equal to student ID that we have in the parameter of the constructor. Now, when I'm creating this object out of the student, every time I say new and I call the class name with the parentheses, it will be calling this constructor. That will be taking two parameters, which is, let's say, John as a name and the 101 as a student ID. This way, it will initialize these instance variables for this object. All right? So if you will try to say, hey, student, can I print your name? Okay, and the same thing, hey student, can I print your student ID? We will get the values John and 101. So the constructors are used to initialize the attributes, or we call them instance variables, of that object while we creating that object, right? When we say new student, we give the values directly.